Hi, I'm Brittany, a neurodivergent mum and speech pathologist. This is Not Just Theories, where I share what actually works in my real, messy life. Because life doesn't follow a theory. Here's what I actually do. Welcome back. This is part 2 in my little series on overstimulation with that boiling kettle analogy from last week. In episode 1, I talked about turning down the heat on the kettle. So it was more about those preventative strategies to reduce the amount of stimulation coming at us in the first place. Today, I'm going to be focused on that second part. It's what I think of as venting the steam. So to me, that means taking care of myself. And it's responding to my rising overstimulation by building in little resets and acts of self-care that let that pressure out before I hit boiling point. So it's less about my kids and more about me, the things I can do throughout the day or at key moments that help me keep showing up as the parent that I want to be, rather than the screaming parent that I turn into when my kettle hits boiling point. So one of the biggest things I've learned, and I talked about it a little bit last week, and it's the power of taking a real break. So it's not scrolling on my phone while I'm standing at the bench, not half doing chores while I'm supposed to be resting, but actually stepping away. So if my husband's home, we often tag team. So, I hand him the kids and just take 15 minutes to myself. Sometimes that might mean lying on the bed doing nothing. Sometimes it's a bath or a shower with the door locked. The activity doesn't matter quite so much as the fact that I completely stop and breathe and let myself be off duty for a moment. So the reason I think this is a little bit different to what I spoke about last week, which is that sort of reducing the heat. This is more about like when the heat is building, having a break to get rid of it. So it's not as much of a preventative strategy as a responsive strategy. So when I'm feeling that heat boil, if I can, with tag team, we'll swap out who's in charge. So, if I'm helping and my daughter's having a big tantrum and I can feel myself starting to lose it, that's when I'll tap out, and Adam will come in and it's his job to then sort of be there for that tantrum. Or, if I'm getting climbed all over and that's starting to be a problem, then I'll swap out, I'll go to a different room, I'll be the one doing the washing in a different room or being in charge of cooking dinner. So often it's ideally it's a real break, but honestly, even just a break from the kids and doing some of the other life admin that we have to do is really important and still counts as a way for us to sort of vent all of that stimulation that builds up. I spoke again last week about protecting those quiet moments, so making sure that I take that first 15 minutes of the nap. I also use quiet time as a responsive strategy. So not just preventative, I don't just have that 15 minutes of quiet time during nap time. I consider that reducing the input. When I'm feeling frazzled, I will buy myself quiet time. So that is where we often use screens. So I know people have different opinions about screen time, but for us, screens can be an absolute godsend because it's one of the only things that will get my 3-year-old sitting in the same spot and being quiet. She's a lot. She's wonderful and busy, but she doesn't stop. But she does zone out like a zombie in front of a screen. Try not to do it too often, but, if it takes us putting on a few episodes of Bluey or a movie, we'll put on, Frozen for her, and I actually then have that bit of a reset time to myself. So when I can feel things building up, I've sort of realized that, my intention of minimizing screen time is less important to me than my intention of being a parent who doesn't scream at my kids. And if it's a choice between avoiding screen time and knowing that that's going to drive me to boiling point and then screaming at her, or using a bit of screen time to give myself a break and then not hitting that point, I have decided that the screen time is the thing that will budge. I will give the screen. I will use that, movie or TV show to prevent the screaming. And different families will have different balances of where that all sits. You might have other ways of getting quiet time. If you've got grandparents that live down the road and you can tag team with them during the day, then it might be a bit easier for you to avoid screen time. But if, like me, you don't, then screen time might be the village that you need, and that's okay. Another thing, I also touched on it last week, there's a lot of overlap between the strategies that I use preventatively and the strategies that I use reactively, but I feel like there's a subtle difference. So it took me a long time to learn that if I don't feed myself properly, everything else feels harder. So I used to, skip lunch, or I just grab scraps of the kids' leftovers, and then I would wonder why I was overwhelmed, and it's because I was hangry. So now if I notice that I'm starting to get agitated, I try to make myself a meal. I pack snacks for myself just like I do for the kids, or I'll eat their snacks if I need to. And it sounds really small, but the difference is huge. I cope so much better when I'm properly fueled. If I'm running on fumes, every sound is louder and every request takes more out of me. Another kind of self-care for me that vents steam is movement. So I'm not someone that hits the gym for an hour every day anymore. I used to do a lot more exercise before I had kids, but it's not realistic for me right now. So now I've found ways to weave movement into my days that help my body release tension. So sometimes it's going out for a walk outside with the pram. Sometimes it's stretching on the living room floor while the kids climb on me. On really stressful days, I might even stomp around the backyard, or, have a little dance out in the kitchen or something. So movement really is like taking that kettle lid off to let out that built up pressure in a really physical way. And I think I'm so guilty of, when I get overwhelmed and overstimulating, wanting to retreat into just like sitting on the couch, trying to like calm myself down. But actually for me, movement is more calming a lot of the time. So it's something I'm trying harder to do, is when I feel the kettle, boiling inside of me, rather than trying to retreat to the corner of the couch, as my instinct tells me to do, it's to actually vent some of that energy out in a way that's, safe and appropriate. And movement is a good way for me. One of the other ways that I look after myself is by being mindful of screens. So trying to, if I'm feeling that kettle building, avoid my phone even more than usual. So trying to, again, when I can tap out, it's more like reading a book, lying in silence, stepping outside. It doesn't have to be fancy. It's just, again, about that, finding activities that are calming and swapping it out for that instead of that added stimulation of the screen. I think one of the hardest parts of self-care as a parent is actually giving yourself permission to do it. It's really easy to think, I should be doing more. I should be cleaning more. I should be being more productive. I should be not putting my kids on the screens quite so much. But what I've realized is that looking after myself is what allows me to look after everyone else. It's that saying about pouring from an empty cup. Self-care isn't a luxury. It's literally venting the steam so that I don't explode on my kids. And it's okay for me to lock myself in the bathroom and have a bath when my husband gets home from work and leave him with the kids. He's had all day just at work, which I know is, I go to work too. It's a lot. But even just the commute at either end is already so much more than what a parent who's home with the children all day gets. And I think that's something to really be mindful of. I would never, before I had kids, have considered a commute a break. And I understand why people don't think it is, but until you have been home 24/7 with children, I think, you don't really understand that even a commute, even if you're having to drive, even if there's awful traffic, is more of a break than looking after an infant and a toddler at the same time. I feel very lucky that my husband completely gets it, because he has taken both kids for a full day before, and he knows what that was like for him just one day, let alone multiple days in a row. So he never has any, I don't have to worry about pushback when he gets home from work and me being like, I just need a break. But I think if your partner doesn't get it, it can be a lot harder to get that time, because it's easy to see, oh, you were home all day with the kids and you got to do all this fun looking stuff as being a break, but it's not the same when you can't go to the bathroom by yourself. So taking the time to have your partner understand why that little reset time when they get home from work is important is so valuable. They may never get it, but if they care about you and they realize that it's important for you, then, giving them that notice of, when you walk through the door, I'll give you, 5 minutes to get your shoes off and get changed out of your work clothes. But then you've got the kids for 15 minutes at least, while I just go and stand in another room. Or, you might even get started with, preparing dinner or something, but just having that time away from the kids can be such a big part of self-care. So I really, really encourage you to do, if you've got a partner that, is safe and is available, take advantage of that. Get them understanding why it's so important that you have that self-care time, because it cares for everybody in the family. No one wants to have someone in the house who's on boiling point. It's not a pleasant sensation to be around. So if episode 1 was all about turning down the heat, so reducing that stimulation coming in, today's episode, although it's similar, I had that little different focus on releasing the pressure in healthy ways. Some of the things that I mentioned were like taking real breaks when I can, even if it's just 15 minutes of tapping out with my partner, protecting quiet moments like nap times for rest instead of chores, finding extra quiet moments if it's a day that I'm finding extra stimulating. And, if that means screens, then that means screens. And, really thinking about like what's the priority there. All of the evidence about screen time, just none of it's about moderate use in a functional way. So, if screen time's something that you've eliminated from your home just because of what other people have told you, rather than through actual experimentation with the impact it has on your kids. I know some kids do go feral with screen time, so not talking about people who've had screen time, reduced it and seen an improvement. People who've just not used screen time and, they're martyring themselves on that front. I was trying so hard when my kids were little to, do the no screen time thing. And I found that using a small to moderate amount of screen time has actually been so beneficial for my whole family, for the amount of negative screaming behavior or, me trying really hard not to scream at my kids that I was having to do, just feeling free to go, you know what, it's building, I'm going to chuck on Bluey and I'm just going to give myself a reset time, has avoided so much of that. If I hadn't tried it, I wouldn't have realized how helpful it could be. I also obviously work really hard, talked about this a little bit, to fuel myself with some food, at least having some snacks packed in the lunchbox when we go out for the day, not just for the kids. I'll cut up some extra fruit for myself, chuck in a muesli bar. I try really hard to find time to move my body in simple, accessible ways that don't require getting out of the house and being child-free, because that can be really tricky to manage. And also finding screen-free moments when I do have that true rest available to me as much as possible. But probably most importantly is just giving myself permission to actually care for me. And that will look different for every person. So, for me, self-care does just look like having a bath, eating a meal, reading a book. Other people, self-care might look like doing your nails or, moisturizing your whole body, or it might look like going for a massage or lighting a candle. Like, there's so many things that people do that feel really powerful to them as giving their body that chance to breathe, relax, vent some of that steam, and, as much as you can, just try and find what works for you that you can build into your life in manageable chunks. I mean, obviously, for me, massage is super relaxing. If I could have a 4-hour massage every day, I would be the most relaxed mum in the world. But obviously, it's just not realistic for most people to do that. I wish we could, but I can't. But what is realistic is, sitting down and doing some trigger point work with like an acupressure ball or something. And, I've got a triade that I use on my neck. So different different things that you can find to actually put yourself first some of the time, and finding the protected time to do it, trading off with your partner so that you both get adequate self-care time. I hope this has been a little bit helpful, because I know everyone talks about self-care all the time, and I know so much of it feels like unrealistic, unable to be achieved for most parents, especially if you're alone with the kids. I have no idea how single parents do it. I'm astounded, constantly impressed by the parents that I know who are doing it on their own. But, leaning into who have you got around you to help, to trade out with. If you don't have anyone, can you use screens really productively, just to try and minimize that yelling and the snapping at the kids when you hit boiling point. In the next episode, I will be sharing the third part of the series, and this is probably the hardest part, and it's what do I do when the kettle is already whistling? So how do I try and stop myself from yelling or snapping at my kids when I have hit that boiling point? It's going to be a bit of a meaty episode, so I hope that you are interested, and I'll talk to you next week. Thanks so much for listening to Not Just Theories. I really appreciate you being here. If this episode resonated with you, the best way to support the show is to follow, leave us a rating or review, or just share this episode with someone else who you think might find it comforting or useful. I hope to see you back here soon.